Dear listeners, welcome to the Deep Journal channel. By subscribing to our channel, you can be informed about detailed reports every time. While the conflicts in the South China Sea and the Black Sea have escalated, conflicts have accelerated in all Iran's border corridors in the Middle East in recent days. This week, when nuclear talks with Iran continued in a tense environment, Iranian and Iranian-backed militants clashed with Israeli, U.S., Saudi and Azeri forces. In the latest news, clashes on the border between Iran and the Taliban fell like a bomb on the agenda. In the clash that broke out, it was claimed that the Taliban seized 2 border posts belonging to Iran. For Afghanistan, the U.S. withdrawal from the region is considered a milestone. After the September 11 attacks, the U.S. Army entered Afghanistan and started an endless war to destroy the terrorist organizations in the region. Later, with the election of President Biden, the region was plunged into chaos after Biden announced that he would not risk his own soldiers, for the sake of a never-ending war, and that he would withdraw from Afghanistan. The Taliban took action suddenly and took over the whole country and its administration in less than a month. The Taliban opposed the latest resistance, and as a result of the withdrawal of the USA, the region passed completely under the administration of the Taliban. China gave great support to the Taliban, who were dealing with the problems and economic difficulties in Afghanistan itself. At the same time, the Taliban tried to maintain peace in the region by making certain agreements with Iran. However, Iran, which is in trouble with the incessant influx of refugees, started to take extraordinary measures on the Afghanistan border. Iran, which increased the inspections at the border posts, closed the border of the Afghan refugees and even stopped the oil transfer to Afghanistan for a while. Today, clashes took place between Iran and the Taliban due to a misunderstanding of the border. Clashes broke out between the Taliban and Iranian border forces due to a misunderstanding of the border, near the Nimruz province, which is on the border of Iran and Afghanistan. News agencies affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Army reported that Iranian farmers in the Shejalek region near Nimruz province were fired upon by the Taliban for border violations. It was stated that when the walls that Iran built within a few hundred meters of the Afghanistan border to combat smugglers were breached by Iranian farmers, the Taliban forces opened fire on Iranian civilians, believing that a border violation had been committed, and a clash broke out between the two sides after the Iranian border guards responded to the Taliban. In the news, there are allegations on social media that the Iranian border checkpoints were seized by the Taliban. This led to a great crisis between the governments of the two countries. Experts, who said that the consequences of the Taliban's seizure of military outposts in Iranian territory would be very severe, expressed the opinion that if this seizure is prolonged, a major war will break out. According to the news published in the local press, it is said that eyewitnesses testified that there was a much more serious conflict than was reported in the media. Eyewitnesses, who claim that both sides suffered great losses in this dangerous conflict, are of the opinion that the conclusion of the crisis would be the healthiest for them. Iran was one of the countries that were most happy with the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. But Iran itself is experiencing the biggest problems as a result of the U.S. withdrawal. It is reported that many terrorist organizations in the region resumed their activities after the Taliban came to power and major smuggling increased in the border regions. These are all elements that threaten Iran. At the same time, the popular revolts in Iran are generally economically based, and the reason for these protests is the many refugees who have entered the country. This is bad news for Iran and Iran-backed Hezbollah and Hamas militants, who welcomed the U.S. withdrawal, and it's a sad fact that they don't know what they're celebrating. Yes, the U.S. withdrew from the region, but the U.S. was able to deal with most of the problems in Afghanistan. But now Iran is dealing with these problems, and it seems that the Taliban are proving that they will take action against Iran when they get the chance. Now, let's take a closer look at the U.S. Taliban-Iran relations, along with the border conflicts between Iran and the Taliban. Iran and Taliban forces clash in border area. Iranian media say Taliban forces opened fire on Iranian farmers thinking they violated the border, leading Iranian soldiers to intervene. Clashes erupted between Iranian soldiers and Taliban forces near the Afghanistan-Iran border, but appear to have led to no casualties. Multiple videos on Wednesday showed Taliban troops mobilizing. Gunfire can be heard while one shows Iranian forces firing artillery shells in response to Taliban fire. The official Iranian news agencies confirmed the battle in the village of Shagalak in Hirmand County. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, affiliated media, said there are walled areas on Iranian soil near the border with Afghanistan in order to combat smuggling. Some Iranian farmers passed the walls but were still inside Iran's border when Taliban forces opened fire, thinking its side had been violated, the report said. The fighting was over and Iranian authorities were discussing the situation with the Taliban, it added. Later on Wednesday, Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said in a statement a misunderstanding between border residents had caused the fighting, without naming the Taliban. A video purportedly showed Taliban forces inside an Iranian garrison, with reports claiming several outposts were seized. Iranian media denied the seizure of any facilities, but said some of the published footage was for the early moments of fighting, and border forces now have complete control over the country's borders. Mohammad Marashi, security deputy for Sistan and Baluchistan's governor, told Iranian state television the clashes were not serious, incurred no harm on personnel or property, and had ended. He named Taliban forces as the instigators. Iran has not officially recognized the Taliban since the group quickly took control of neighboring Afghanistan following the withdrawal of United States forces in August. Iranian officials have repeatedly said the recognition would hinge on the formation of an inclusive government in Afghanistan, but have called on the U.S. to lift its sanctions on the Taliban to quell humanitarian concerns. In mid-November, Hassan Kazemi Komi, Iran's special representative on Afghanistan, led an Iranian delegation for an official visit to the country to hold talks. He met several Taliban officials to discuss the country's economy, geopolitics of the region, and security concerns. In late October, Iran hosted a meeting of neighbors plus Russia in Tehran. However, Taliban officials were not invited. Iran is glad the Americans are gone, but the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan creates a host of problems for Tehran, with no easy solutions. Taliban officials declaring victory at the Kabul airport on August 31. Their swift takeover caught Iran by surprise. For 20 years, Iranian officials have said they wanted the U.S. military out of Afghanistan. Iran supplied Afghan insurgents with weapons to use against American soldiers. It sheltered al-Qaeda's top leaders in Tehran. It courted the Taliban with diplomatic visits, covertly and then publicly. But when the United States finally left Afghanistan in August, the swift Taliban takeover caught Iran off guard. Suddenly, Iran, a Shiite Muslim theocracy, had a militant Sunni theocracy on its border that is widely seen as anti-Shiite. The upheaval has also sent a flood of Afghan refugees into Iran, has led to fears that Afghanistan will again become an incubator for terrorism, and has trapped Iranian leaders in a diplomatic tangle in dealing with a Taliban government seen as both a potential enemy and partner. Iran has come to understand that the enemy's enemy is not your friend, and the Taliban are a more complex problem than Americans, said Mohammad Hossein Ahmadi, a former Iranian diplomat who advised Afghanistan's government and worked in the country for the United Nations. The consensus is to deal with the Taliban very carefully and pragmatically. Iran's biggest concern, officials said, is the resurgence of the Afghan branch of the Islamic State, which has carried out large-scale attacks against Shiites in Afghanistan and could use Afghanistan as a base to launch terrorist attacks in Iran. The Taliban, despite their promises to provide security and stability, have so far proven unwilling or unable to prevent ISIS attacks on Shiites in Afghanistan. Iranian officials are also concerned about the fate of two minority ethnic groups, the Hazara, who are Shiite, and the Tajiks, who have close cultural ties to Iran. The Taliban eliminated the informal power-sharing arrangement that encouraged representation for those groups in the government, and they have been accused of carrying out extrajudicial killings and forced displacements of members of both groups. The Taliban have denied these accusations. The Taliban takeover has also sent a new wave of refugees into Iran, adding to the more than 2 million Afghans who fled to Iran during previous times of upheaval. Their arrival has stretched Iran's resources at a time when the country's economy has been battered by the coronavirus pandemic and international financial sanctions. But any Iranian response to the new situation in Afghanistan has potential costs. Recognizing the Taliban could set off a backlash at home among Iranians who see the Taliban as a terrorist group and tarnish Iran's branding of itself as a protector of Shiites in the Muslim world. Rejecting the Taliban, on the other hand, could undo the gains of Iran's careful courtship of the group over the years, and quickly turn a tenuous relationship hostile. Iranian officials fear getting dragged into a protracted conflict it neither wants nor could afford. For now, Iranian officials say they are taking a middle-of-the-road approach. Officials have acknowledged the Taliban are a reality but stopped short of recognizing them as Afghanistan's legitimate government. They have also expressed concern about the safety of resistance leaders such as Ahmad Massoud, who leads an anti-Taliban militia with historical ties to Iran in the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, although they have not publicly endorsed his cause, and diplomats and analysts said they had seen no sign that Iran was supporting it financially or militarily. We are in contact with all sides and advise them all to implement the idea of an inclusive government, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian said in an interview. Afghanistan is facing many different challenges. The existence of ISIS in Afghanistan that has the experience of guerrilla warfare in Syria is a real threat. Iran sent fighters and commanders to Syria in 2011 and Iraq in 2014 to fight ISIS, but even if Iran offered, the Taliban are unlikely to welcome Iranian forces the way Iraq did. Iran has had at least 2 diplomatic meetings with the Taliban since the group seized power, including a meeting with the Taliban foreign minister on Saturday. Iran has laid out 3 main demands of the Taliban, according to Iranian diplomats, officials and experts. They include securing Iran's borders from terrorist infiltration, preventing the Islamic State from gaining ground in Afghanistan, and protecting the rights and security of Shiite minorities. In addition, Iran has asked the Taliban to help curb drug lords from using Iran as a corridor to transport Afghan opium to Europe, to keep open commerce and currency exchange with Iran, and to refrain from creating social and economic conditions that would send more Afghans across Iran's borders. Kamal Karazi, the former foreign minister and current head of Iran's powerful Strategic Council on Foreign Relations, told Iranian news media last week. Our strategy in Afghanistan completely depends on the Taliban's behavior, Mr. Karazi said. The Islamic Republic of Iran does not want to meddle in Afghanistan's affairs, but naturally we have legitimate interests that must be guaranteed. Iran and Afghanistan share deep cultural and historical ties that date back centuries. One of Afghanistan's 2 official languages, Dari, is a dialect of Persian, and the 2 countries share many traditions, including celebrating the Nowruz New Year holiday in the spring. Iran's border with Afghanistan stretches 572 miles with 2 crossings vital to trade and commerce. Iran's exports to Afghanistan total an estimated $7 billion annually, and the country has relied on Afghanistan's currency market to acquire hard currency in circumvention of international banking sanctions.